Tēnā koutou, nau mai, haere mai. Hello everyone, my name is Laura Jean McKay and I am delighted to welcome you here for the virtual launch of Octavia Cade's new novel, The Stone Wētā. Isn't it beautiful?
There it is.
There it is. Wherever you are tuning in from, please grab yourself a cup of tea or maybe something stronger and settle back as we celebrate a new and astounding contribution to New Zealand and indeed global literature. This launch is especially exciting for me. As a lecturer in creative writing at Massey University, it has been my honour to be part of the Massey University and Square Edge Community Arts Visiting Artist Residency, for which Octavia Cade is the 2020 Writer in Residence, currently residing in splendid and quite prolific isolation at Square Edge. Today or tonight, depending on where you're tuning in from, Marie Hodgkinson from Paper Road Press will be launching the book. Hi Marie.
Kia ora Laura, kia ora Octavia.
And this will be followed by a reading from the author, Octavia Cade, and a Q&A. Hi Octavia.
Hi.
If out there you just can't wait to the end of this launch to get your hands on the book, you can press pause and please support your local bookshop or library by putting in a pre-order for The Stone Wētā by email or phone, or head over to Paper Road Press, their website, to find out other ways to get the print or ebook. And now it is my absolute delight to introduce Marie Hodgkinson. Marie is from Paper Road Press, a small press based in Wellington. Marie is the publisher there and looks for books from beyond the beaten track. New Zealand stories that offer something a bit different to the usual fare. The Stone Wētā is Paper Road Press's first release for 2020. Kia ora, Marie.
Thank you, Laura. And congratulations, Octavia, on your new book day.
Thank you.
I'm just thrilled to launch The Stone Wētā today, just as I was thrilled to see it arrive in my inbox on the 31st of March last year. I went back and checked when it actually arrived when I was writing this speech. That date now seems far more than little over a year ago.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
Is what, a pandemic since then?
Something like that.
Volcanic eruption?
I feel like I've heard, yeah, a few things on the news. So yeah, I am thrilled to launch The Stone Wētā today, and even before I read the manuscript for the first time, I knew I was in for something special. Octavia's writing is always a treat, sometimes a terrifying one, or one that leaves a lingering and not entirely pleasant taste in the mouth, but a treat nonetheless. And The Stone Wētā, as I was soon to discover, is no different. In The Stone Wētā, climate science and the scientists whose research reveals unwanted truths are being erased. A scattered group of female scientists work together to preserve research from around the world. They each choose a species from their region or area of research as a codename, the Stone Wētā from the title, the Antarctic lichen, the sand cat, and so on. They hide their true identities even from one another, seeking safety in ignorance as they work to preserve knowledge. The characters of the Stone Wētā use their public lives as cover for smuggling information, but the forces they are up against don't limit themselves to manipulating and destroying data. As the noose grows tighter, parts of their network start to go dark. A researcher disappears from her field site and is found on the other side of the country by a woman who doesn't dare to admit she might recognize her. Another scientist, far above Earth on the International Space Station, experiences one too many near misses to put it down to mere coincidence. The safety of code names and isolated cells means one missing thread doesn't destroy the whole net, but each attack snips away more and more. Octavia takes what could have been a bombastic us versus them underdog story and pulls her focus in tight on these characters. We see what they see and, more importantly, what they do not. An unknown ally can be as dangerous as an unknown enemy. The result is a claustrophobic narrative that forces the characters to question not only every choice that they make, but every choice that brought them to where they are. Even the names they chose to deflect attention begin instead to reflect parallels between the pressures experienced by the species they named themselves after and the scientists themselves, as they find themselves being hunted or becoming the hunters. Early reviewers have already described The Stone Wētā as a singular treat, a sharp and bold book about climate change that offers hope and inspiration sorely needed these days, and a gripping narrative in which tension builds beneath a seemingly calm surface. I am beyond proud to launch The Stone Wētā today. So before I hand back over, I would like to thank everyone who was involved in getting us this far. To those early reviewers, Tim Jones, Mariah Haskins, and Elise Tobler. To Emma Weekly for her striking cover art on display behind me. To Jenny Nimon for her eagle-eyed proofreading. And to you, Laura, for facilitating this virtual launch. But most of all, thank you to you, Octavia, for putting your book in my hands 13 months ago. Happy Book Day.
Thank you. I'd also like to add to a quick thank you to Clarkesworld, who actually published the first chapter of The Stone Wētā as a standalone short story a couple of years ago. It only started out as a short story, and I was, super happy to have it published by them, and it just sort of grew from there.
Well, congratulations to you.
Cheers.
Cheers. Congratulations to you both. And I want to say that it is an absolutely stunning artifact. The production of this book, the Paper Road Press books, are just beautiful. So receiving this in the mail is just an absolute delight, and we will soon be out of lockdown and people will be able to get it. So it is my absolute pleasure now to introduce the star of the show and this incredible writer, Octavia Cade. It has been my absolute pleasure to get to know Octavia over the last few weeks, and I'm so looking forward to reading more of her work. Octavia is a New Zealand writer who has a PhD in science communication. She has over 40 short stories published in markets like the mentioned Clarkesworld, Asimov's and Shimmer, as well as several novellas, 2 poetry collections and a collection of non-fiction essays. Octavia has won 3 Sir Julius Vogel Awards and attended Clarion West in 2016. And of course, she is the current 2020 Massey University Square Edge Writer in Residence. Octavia, in lockdown. Glorious lockdown.
Lockdown started, I think, less than a week after I took up the residency. So here I am in my arts centre flat in splendid self-isolation.
And how productive you've been in that time.
Well,
very productive. But on the other hand, there's not a lot else for me to do. there's right, or there's only so much chocolate I can eat left on my own. Yeah, writing is it really.
Writing or staring blankly at the wall.
Yes.
So I'm sure that by now everyone is very, very eager to hear you read from The Stone Wētā, and we would love to hear that too.
Sure. Unfortunately, I cannot read from a copy of my own because due to pandemic and the fact that we're so isolated, and the flat I am in has a PO box for an address, I don't actually have a copy of the book myself. So what I do have is, one of the ebooks, which I will be reading from. I'll be reading from an excerpt from a chapter called The Glass Sponge. A glass sponge, for those of you unfamiliar with the organism, is one of the longest living life forms on Earth that we know of. They're down in Antarctica and they live there's sponges, they live under the ice sheets on the ocean floor, and they may be, 10 to 15,000 years old. And what's interested me is that as climate change is causing the ice shelves to melt, more daylight is coming to the sponge, and they're suddenly growing a lot quicker than before. So here is my excerpt about the glass sponge from the, shall we call them the climate operative who has taken her name from that sponge. The glass sponge hated when visitors came to Scott Base. She supposed it was ungenerous of her, distrustful and unwelcoming. But for all her desire to share the science of her days with people who were unfamiliar with it, she could never keep from suspecting their motives. It was an open secret, more or less, among those who worked down in Antarctica, that a southern cache of climate data was stashed nearby the base, smuggled out of countries whose administrations preferred to purge their science rather than rely upon it. An open secret as well, that one of the operatives responsible for that cache worked at the base, though who she was and her code name was unconfirmed, if suspected. And while the glass sponge didn't know all of the dozens of permanent staff there, at least not well enough for confidence, she was confident in enough of them to know that they would have come to her if they'd guessed anything threatening of their co-workers. It had happened once before. A meteorologist had pulled her aside late one afternoon when she was checking dive equipment in preparation for the next day's work. The new guy, the other scientist had said, the one with the ice core team? I don't know anything for certain, but there's something about him, about the questions he's been asking. I don't know what he's after and I don't care to know. Just watch yourself, all right? The glass sponge had done exactly that, been as vague and as scatty as she could get away with, done everything she could to make herself look too silly to be a threat. The scientists she trusted rolled their eyes and went along, made a game of it. She overheard their made-up complaints, observed with quiet malice the all-too-obvious rolling of the eyes when she entered a room the ice core interloper was already in, and when the season was over, that interloper went home, she hoped, with nothing. Good bloody riddance, she said, under her breath. But that minor discretion was undermined when congratulatory beers came her way at dinner and she couldn't stop herself from smirking. You look like you swallowed the canary, said one of the astronomers, smirking himself. A cold and lonely little canary, said the glass sponge, too frozen to swallow, hopped his way off the ice, heading for home. But they kept coming, the quiet and the questioning. It was never the ones she could see who bothered her. Mostly people weren't anywhere near as subtle as they thought. And that was a terrifying thought for a woman who prided herself on a certain subtle capacity of her own. And the glass sponge could spot them well enough. If she wasn't certain, she treated them as if she were, because that way lay safety, and if they were any sort of honest scientist, they wouldn't begrudge her scepticism. It was the ones she couldn't pick that bothered her, and she knew they were there, worming their way in, noting who disappeared when and where, narrowing down who was doing the caching. It could even be one of the people she trusted. The glass sponge wasn't foolish enough to think herself infallible, but she had a duty to science, above that which saw her examining the polar biota. And she couldn't let herself be frightened into immobility, couldn't keep second-guessing loyalties. That and paranoia would drive her mad. So she smiled when the people she trusted took sudden, diversionary trips of their own onto the ice, buggering off for the afternoon with no clear purpose. I was just off for a walk, said Dave. Said Lexi and Marama and Bill. You never know what you can find out there. Dave's shit-eating grin was particularly effective. You bloody stirrer, said the glass sponge. After he'd made a target of himself one day in the dining hall, there was snickering over the dinner plates, someone snorting into their cup. You're all bloody stirrers. I hope they go home thinking everyone here's in on it, said Marama. I hope they're so damn confused they never come back. But that was wishful thinking. Wishful thinking, too, with the dark jokes about not going home at all. I told him to look out for the leopard seals, said Bill. You've seen him, contrary bugger. Didn't pay any attention, thought I was just yanking his chain. Realised a bit too early he was being stalked. Shame, said the glass sponge, but beneath the bravado she wasn't sure if she would have celebrated a death. It might have made things easier in the short run. Might have smacked of justice even, that an operative so intent on supporting those who were doing their damnedest to encourage ecological collapse came to a carnivorous end. But there'd have been questions, more of them and less silent than before, and the suspicion that the death hadn't been accidental, that there was someone down on the base who dealt in murder as well as espionage. It disturbed her that her most compelling argument against murder was a practical one. The glass sponge wanted to think herself moral in that, but the disappearances so far were so one-sided. Climate scientists she knew only by code names and from whispers, that her own mental landscape took on ever more the patina of war. So that is from one of the early chapters.
Beautifully read. Thank you, Octavia.
Insert wild applause here. Thank you.
That's right. Well, I have so many questions for you, but was there anything you'd like to say before we launch into that, Octavia?
I would just like to put forth again Emma Weekly, who did the cover. It is a beautiful cover. I am so happy with it. And if you would like any gorgeous insect covers of your own, I'm sure Emma would be happy to talk to you, because her work is just astonishingly good.
It is.
She is a New Zealand artist as well, so.
She's incredible. I love her work.
And have you both worked with her before?
I haven't. Marie has.
Yeah, so Emma has done a couple of covers for Paper Road Press, and she's always wonderful to work with.
Oh, fantastic.
All her covers are so different, and they're also good. So spreading credit around here where it's due. She really does deserve it.
Well, it sounds like such a perfect collaboration between author, artist, and publisher. You know, what a lovely result,
yeah.
of that incredible talent that we have here in New Zealand.
They're such New Zealand-looking beasts, aren't they? I mean, everyone's got that story of, you know, finding a weta in their gumboot, or
just waking up with one. Yeah, that's my story. That's a good one.
In your mouth?
I love them. I think they're fantastic.
Yeah, because I guess it's just that, you know, they like damp places. I don't go camping anymore.
Wow. I think everybody does have a weta story. Maybe we'll have to start that on Twitter, Octavia.
Yeah. Please tell us your weta stories.
Yes.
To me, they're so ugly. They come back almost round to good looking again. I think they're fascinating. And the stone weta itself is a really fascinating creature. It lives down sort of mostly in central Otago in the rock and pillars there, because I did my PhD down in Dunedin. And it has this amazing survival mechanism in that it freezes solid during the winter. It's like hibernation.
Like super hibernation.
To a whole new level. It doesn't just sleep away, it freezes solid. And then when spring comes around, it sort of melts and, you know, scuttles off out of its little rock hole and goes on about its life again. But
that is amazing.
Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
And that actually leads in perfectly to my first question, because there is so much to this extraordinary and very urgent novel, but one of the things that might strike the reader first is the actual structure of the book, which follows several characters, all of whom share their name and much of their way of perceiving the world with real plant and animal life forms. And the fictional prose is so stunningly intersected with facts about the species, like the stone weta, the sand cat, and the Antarctic lichen. So I wondered, how did you choose which species would feature in the stone weta?
Oh, well, I love weird biology. I mean, my scientific background is biology. And so whenever I come across something on the internet about some sort of strange, weird, or disgusting little creature, I immediately favourite on the grounds that, you know, there's something I can do with that in the future. I think one of my favourite ones, when I was looking at the stone weta, there was a recent discovery of a Madagascan gecko from the island of Madagascar. And when we have geckos in New Zealand and we see, when the cat gets hold of them or something, they lose their tail and they scuttle off. But this particular gecko, the fish scale gecko, it doesn't shed its tail, it sheds its entire skin. And it's there, skinned, bald, like a pulsing raw chicken breast. And then it runs off up into the tree. And the photos of this thing without its skin are wonderfully disgusting. I mean, you can see the veins and the little heart and so on pulsing between this raw chicken breast. And so that went into my save file, must do something with. And a lot of the ones that I ended up picking at the end had characteristics that you could apply to the people they were representing. For instance, the leader of the circle of scientists, as much as they have a leader, is a woman from Mali, an African country. She's called the sand cat, and the sand cat is this little feline that lives in the desert. It bites for its size harder than any other cat. And if you look at its feet, so that its little feet don't get burnt in sand in the middle of the day, and so it keeps it warm at night. The bottom of its feet is all fur. There's this really long sort of fur between the toes, and that also means that when it's walking along the desert, it doesn't leave tracks. So it can sneak along. It's one of these furry feet are a way of hiding it from predators. And I thought that was something fantastic that you could absolutely use.
Perfect
I have
for
to
an
say,
unassuming scientist covering her tracks.
and one of the cutest things I've ever seen on the internet, actually, and that's one of the joys of this book is discovering new species, taking time out to say, well, what does a sand cat really look like, because the facts are interwoven, and suddenly discovering this unbelievably cute but apparently very bitey cat who lives in the desert.
I found another one today, actually. I was skimming the internet today. If I ever do a sequel to the Stone Wētā, it will include the black rain frog that lives in South Africa. It is this grumpy looking little black frog, and apparently if predators try to haul it out of its little underground hole, it puffs itself up so big that it stuffs itself in the hole and can't be dislodged. I thought, that's amazing. Nature is amazing. So
fantastic defense system. So, and a lot of the characters in the Stone Wētā, well, all of the main characters are women. What was the thinking around this choice?
A couple of things. First, I wanted scientists for this who were working basically underground, who were working in the background, who were, just trucking along, going quite unnoticed. And women are better at going unnoticed than men. Part of it is that less is often expected of them. They're just these sort of background characters, they're not brought forward often in the way that male scientists have traditionally been done. So I thought that if you were looking for effective underground workers, you go for the people who are less likely to be noticed. And the other thing is that all over the world, when you look at the potential effects of climate change, it's often the poorer communities, the more developing communities that will be harder hit. And I think if you look at often the history of conservation movements, it's often women, especially women of colour, who take up the challenge really to move against these things, because it's their communities that are being most effective. I think in particular of Wangari Maathai, the Kenyan founder of the Greenbelt movement, which was a tree planting movement to stop desertification in Africa. she ended up winning, I think, the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004, because once the environment is more sustainable, there's less conflict over, limited resources. And so she was very much in my mind when I was writing a lot of this. So that's why women. History and impact.
Yeah.
They're wonderful and very impactful characters. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to have a favourite character because they are all stunning. But I think my favourite is the Antarctic lichen, who states at one point, isolation was one thing, daylight another, and the Antarctic lichen both admired the act and feared the consequence of it. Those lines gave me such chills for their prescience for our current situation. Are there correlations between the themes in your book and what is happening in the current global pandemic?
I suppose you could say so, yes. Although less this pandemic than the one that happened about 5 years ago, the Ebola pandemic in Liberia. Because so much of the Stone Wētā is about access to relevant, timely, useful information. And one of the problems for the Liberian scientific community when it came to combating Ebola in their country is that many of the research papers that would have been useful to them were behind paywalls. If a Liberian doctor wanted to access just one paper, it would be likely to cost him or her half their weekly salary. That's ludicrous. This is an issue that has come up again with coronavirus, and there are some sort of research depositories that are making their information on COVID-19 open access. But scientific information like this shouldn't be behind paywalls. There is something fundamentally wrong when life-saving material like this is ring-fenced from researchers and from the general public, because in many cases the general public is funding that research, whether it is through the money that their government gives to universities or through other forms of tax. And the idea that scientific literature is distanced in this way, it's kept away from people, it's a disaster waiting to happen. It was a disaster with the Liberian situation. And when governments are tampering, shall we say, with the climate data and making it less accessible, preventing scientists from talking to each other, that is likely to cause, I think, a great amount of damage.
This book about information and about climate change, as you say, the way that governments might make or break advantages in climate science and communication is threaded through the book in such an elegant but very deeply troubling way. So I guess from what you've just said, political influence is as dangerous as your book implies when it comes to science. Would you see the Stone Wētā, like, is it a sort of reflection of current or past situations, or is it a warning of what is to come?
Well, sadly, it's ripped from the headlines. The idea for the original short story, the one that was published in Clarkesworld, came when I started reading science news articles about what people were calling guerrilla archivists, people who were trying to preserve data across borders, who were worried that when certain governments were coming into power, that their environmental reports and records and information could be tampered with or just, removed from the websites that were supposedly set up to, inform people. And so there was this sort of cross-border movement of scientists and data archivists trying desperately to save as much data as they could. because we have seen, unfortunately, a number of cases where not just governments, but powerful organisations in general are suppressing and misinforming on climate data. I mean, a year or two back, it came out that big oil, that Shell and Exxon, had known for about 40 years the effects of climate change and what it was likely to be and what their products were likely to, the causes there and consequences that use of their products was likely to bring about. And not only did they sit on that data, but they actively funded misinformation and funded excuse me, I've lost the train of thought. They would fund misinformation and political lobbyists to make sure that not only does this information not come to light, but there is no need to do anything about it, you know. And similarly, just in Australia in 2016, the Australian government actually put pressure on the United Nations to keep the effects of climate change on the Great Barrier Reef out of their World Heritage and Tourism in a Changing Climate report. And we've just seen over the past week that the Great Barrier Reef has undergone its third major bleaching event in the past 5 years. I can understand potentially that governments may not want the environmental disasters on their doorsteps to be public knowledge, and in the case of this particular port, the people from the Australian government were saying that it was due down to tourism, because they had information that tourism tended to decrease if it was linked to environmental problems. But, you know, if you think long term, if the reef dies, there's going to be no tourism, none whatsoever. And, you know, the amount of communities on the north coast of Australia who depend on income from the Great Barrier Reef, what is going to happen to those communities if the reef dies? And so these are the kinds of things that I kept seeing popping up in news reports. Scientists saying they'd been asked to change the keywords in their scientific papers before the journals would publish them, to remove or lessen the presence of climate change vocabulary in those keywords. Scientists prevented from speaking at conferences. Stuff like that. Climate scientists losing their jobs. And you've got to start to wonder at some point, you know, how much of these things are going to impact upon us in the future. Because if we lack decent information, we lack the ability to make good decisions about what to do with the information that we have. The example I like to use is that science can model for you, say, different levels of sea level rise. You know, is it going to rise this much or this much or this much? Science can give you those models. It can't tell you what the local council or the regional council is going to do about their coastal infrastructure. It can't tell you if they're going to move it, if they're going to change it, where they're going to get the money to do this from. And the thing is, when it comes time for these councils and local government and national government to make these decisions, if they don't have accurate data, then they're going to make bad decisions.
And what is the role of literature in all of this? What are your intentions for this book?
Science fiction to me has often been a way of future-proofing. It gives people a chance to debate the issues in a way that's often more accessible to them than, say, scientific journals or the back budgets of the Treasury Department if you're looking for how to fund things. These are not accessible documents. You said that I think the Antarctic lichen was one of your favourite characters. In the Stone Wētā, she talks a lot about how scientists have in some ways brought it on themselves by making their science so inaccessible to the general public, so unappealing. I mean, I went into science communication because while I wanted a career in the sciences originally, it was so awful having to read the scientific papers. It's like they'd taken every fun and wonderful and joyous thing out of the science and crushed it. I mean, we, as scientists, we have a responsibility to communicate what we do to the people who fund our work, to the people who benefit from it, to the people who it could affect. And having the scientific paper is one of the... Scientific paper is designed to communicate with other scientists in your field. It does that effectively. It does not do it broadly. I mean, a botanist may understand a paper written by another botanist. A geologist or a zoologist may not, even they may not be able to, pick through a lot of what is in that paper. And we have made scientific writing professionally so turgid, so awful and unappealing that is there any wonder there are climate deniers out there, that there are the anti-vaxxers and so on. Most people are not evil. They don't want to be stupid. They're looking for something they can understand. And if some weirdo out on the internet says putting a potato in your sock will help your child recover from tetanus, is it any wonder they want to believe that over the Journal of Immunology and how incredibly difficult it is to understand everything they put out?
They can even access that journal.
Yeah, they can't even access the journal unless they want to pay like $40 to $50 for a single paper. I mean, I think what each of these characters do is in the Stone Wētā, as well as doing their own part in preserving and transmitting data, they also represent different ways, I think, of looking at science. And the Antarctic lichen is very aware of how much that she and scientists like her have failed as a science communicator. She is not a good science communicator. She knows this. She says she's the only astronaut that's ever been to, a primary school and bored the children, because she just cannot find a way to talk to them, because all her training from the moment you go to university and step into your first science class, all your training is to produce this specific piece of literature that is the scientific paper, to read it, to write it. And that is every week you're churning these copies out in lab reports. And it's you get marked down if you use the first person, for instance, which is ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous. And so, yes, I think that's what science fiction can do in a way that science can't. It can allow you to explore scientific possibilities and scientific change in a way that touches the entire community rather than this tiny, rather incestuous little group.
And your science fiction does that particularly well. You managed to use all of this incredible information that you seem to be constantly gathering and be able to communicate that so effectively in such crisp and gorgeous prose. This book is just it's quite addictive. Once you start, you can't stop, you can't put it down. But Octavia, I believe you wrote it. It came out quite quickly. Is that correct?
Yes. Obviously the first chapter, because it was that short story, was already done, but the rest of it came out. It took about a month to write. This is not normal.
It's not normal, everybody.
This has rarely happened to me. Normally my writing takes much, much longer, but I think because so many of the issues in the Stone Wētā have been percolating in the back of my mind for so many years, I had a very strong, it's almost as though I'd been writing drafts subconsciously for a long time for this story. And so when it was finally sit down, get it in. Marie had a call open and I thought, better get something in quickly.
And anyone who...
Was it the last day?
It was the last day that I was open for submissions when it turned out.
Yeah, so I was writing for a deadline and it did give me, shall we say...
A bit of a fire under you.
Yes,
yeah,
it did, but it was also something that I've been considering for a very long time. So if you are not producing a novel in a month, don't feel bad, because I don't expect to do it again ever. And it is a short novel, it has to be said. It's about 45,000 words, so nearly 200 pages. Yeah.
Anyone who reads this novel will want to ask the same question. Will there be more? Will we actually get to read about this incredible frog who manages to fill up a space as a defense mechanism? Is there a book 2?
I would like to write a sequel to it, because there are issues that are raised in the Stone Wētā that I particularly would like to get into. The Gimpy, for example, the Australian operative, because what I like about this set of women is they all have very different opinions as to how this climate fight should be going. Some are quite militaristic, some are not. And the idea of ecocide, of what we are willing to, of what we are willing to do to people who are guilty of it. You know, do we look away? These coal mining on the Great Barrier Reef, yes, it makes jobs, but when you are destroying, you know, one of the natural wonders of the world, is there any way that you should or could be held accountable for that? Is it even possible? We in the last century, the world experienced, you know, genocide, and it set up a mechanism at The Hague for dealing with that. What happens to people who deliberately kill off sections of the environment, ecosystems that may never come again? Do we let it go? Do we hold them responsible in intangible ways? Do we fine them? Do we put them in jail? What about capital punishment? I mean, I'm not saying, you know, find these people and shoot them in the streets, but this was, I'm looking at, again, the historical parallel between how we treat people who are found guilty of genocide and how we treat people who are guilty of ecocide. Do we treat them the same? Is there a parallel? Should we be treating them the same? Because, you know, there's no... I think arguments to say maybe yes, maybe no, but it's an interesting conversation that I think hasn't come up terribly often, and that is something that that is an argument going on in the Stone Wētā. You know, how should we be responding to this? That is something that I would very much like to look at in any possible sequel.
And I always maintain that great literature is that which doesn't answer questions and doesn't close doors, but asks the big questions and opens those doors up. And I think that the Stone Wētā does that, and your sequel, as you've just shown us, has these big questions behind it. You're already asking that, and I think I could speak for anyone who reads the Stone Wētā that we're all looking forward to your response to these big questions. Octavia, congratulations on this remarkable achievement. It is a beautiful book, and one that I'm very proud to be here talking about with the wonderful Marie Hodgkinson and, of course, Octavia Cade. So what a lovely book party. I'm sure that people watching this will also have some big questions to ask Octavia. I hope that you pose them either in your own work or to Octavia herself, who's wonderfully active in social media spheres. I hope that's okay to tell people to ask you questions, Octavia.
I'm on Twitter, pretty much only Twitter, so... So just, hit me up there.
I'd like to thank so much Massey University and the wonderful creative writing department and the Massey University Arts Committee, particularly Tom Conroy, Tina Macaretti and Anne Meredith, who made the very, very wise decision to award the 2020 Square Edge and Massey Artist in Residency to Octavia. Square Edge Community Arts is a wonderful organisation. Please visit their Facebook page. They're doing extraordinary things during this period of lockdown, opening up a lot of their artworks, and also Octavia has a blog on that page, which is very well worth visiting. Paper Road Press, what a remarkable publisher. Please do go and see their other books, including their gorgeous covers. Please do support them. They are one of New Zealand's just really, really brave and exciting small presses. Thank you, Paper Road Press. The Palmerston North City Library is so active in supporting artists like Octavia Cade, especially through the Off the Page series that we share with them. And if you want to get a copy, which of course you do, of Octavia's book, please go first to your local bookseller in Palmerston North, which is where Octavia and I are at the moment. That's Bruce Mackenzie Booksellers. They've also been incredibly supportive of this book. But give your local bookseller a call to see if they are taking pre-orders, or send them an email. You can also go to Paper Road Press and look at other ways to get the ebook and the paper book. And with that, I happily conclude this launch and congratulate you both once again.
Oh, I think all the congratulations should go to Octavia.
I was just going to say a lot of it should go to Marie too, because she did some wonderful editing on this book, and just from the look of it, it's so beautiful.
I promise it's beautiful in person as well, and I have to say it's always a joy to work on your writing. So
yes, we've worked together before on a couple of things. So
well, here's to many more. Congratulations, Octavia.
Yes. Thank you.
Here's to you.
Here's to you. And here's to all of you out there who have joined us today for the launch of the Stone Wētā. Thank you for being here.